the deficit by $3 trillion. President Obama, in his final budget, fiscal year 2017, his cumulative deficit was about $6 trillion. 4 years later, in President Trump's final budget for fiscal year 2021, his cumulative deficit over 10 years was $5.6 trillion. I mean, neither one of those presidents ever projected a deficit more than $1 trillion. President Biden came into office. He has yet to produce a budget where he proposed a deficit less than $1.3 trillion. So we went from President Trump's budget in fiscal year 2021 of $5.6 trillion. A year later, President Biden projected a 10-year deficit of $14.5 trillion. The following year, another $14.4 trillion. Last year's budget, he was projecting $17 trillion of 10-year cumulative deficit. This budget now is $16.3 trillion. Now, I see President Biden's budget going up $8 trillion over Trump's, then going up another $3 trillion over his own budget, and now coming down $1 trillion less than not even $1 trillion, about $700 billion less. Where do you come up with saving $3 trillion in deficit?
Well, that's a straightforward calculation, which compares the budget that he's proposed with the baseline that would exist if current law continues.
Again, the baseline he came in with was $5.6 trillion. He bumped that baseline to $14.5 trillion, maintained the $14.5 trillion, bumped that to $17 trillion, so he increased it $3 trillion. I guess brought it down $700 billion. Again, where do you get a $3 trillion reduction in deficit other than just making it up, pulling it out of thin air, which is what you've done?
Well, the president is not pulling it out of thin air. He's proposed a number of savings.
Where's the calculation? Tell me how you calculate a $3 trillion decrease in the deficit when you go from $5.6 trillion to 14.5, 17, and now 16. Where is a $3 trillion reduction deficit ever shown in the president's own budgets?
Well, I think if you look at the budget and you examine the tables, the table
I'm looking at the budget. I got the numbers here. I'm an accountant.
I do too.
I can do the math.
Table S3 gives the budget baseline, and then the table S4 gives the proposed budget, and you compare those two, and you'll see exactly where these numbers come from.
Provide me that calculation, please. Okay, I'd like to see that because I'm giving the numbers here, so I'd appreciate that calculation. Let me ask you a question. Do you know how much the federal government spent in total only 4 years ago in fiscal year 2019? Well,
that was pre-pandemic.
I realize that.
I don't have that number in front of me, but
okay. Well, it was $4.4 trillion. You know how much how much U.S. population has grown since that point in time?
Few percent.
Yeah, less than 2%. Do you know how much you're proposing? What percent increase in you're proposing spending next year? We went up, from $4.4 trillion. Population grew at 2%. Do you know what percent increase?
The population aged, and because we have an older population spending on Social Security, Medicare.
The answer to the question is you're increasing spending 63%. Almost $3 trillion over what we spent, 4.4 up to 7.3 trillion. How can you justify that?
Senator Johnson, let's let the Secretary answer your question.
Well, the President has proposed a budget that I regard as fiscally responsible. You are looking at one metric, which is the dollar value of the deficit. I think a more relevant economic measure is real net interest as a share of GDP. We have a strongly growing economy with a much larger GDP. And if you look at table S1, you'll see that the proposed budget stabilizes real net interest over 10 years at an historically normal level. And the president's budget helps Americans lower costs that are tremendously burdensome to them. It provides adequate funding to the Internal Revenue Service so that they can collect taxes that are due and shrink what is an utterly enormous tax gap amounting to about $150 billion
Time of the gentleman's
a year.
expired.
The
Senator
president's
Bennett.
massive deficit spending has caused the value of a dollar to decrease from $1 to 85 cents during his administration. That's what the president's budget
The
is
time of the
about.
gentleman's expired. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. Thank you.